Welcome to a Pickwick Monthly, everyone. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and my Pickwickian co-host for today is Kevin Quinn. Hey, Kevin.
Hi, Ed. Good to be here.
Excellent. Good. And we have, oh, good, Max McGee's in the audience because he will be co-hosting next month, and I'll introduce him later on in the program. I'll tell you all about that later on in the program. And we are in the midst of 20 months talking about Charles Dickens's The Posthumous Papers of the Pickwick Club, as it was first serialized in monthly parts from March 1836 to October 1837. Once a month, myself and one of a rotating set of co-hosts talk about each serialized part. Along the way, I share some items in the Rosenbach's collections, complete serial issues of the Pickwick Papers. We've already looked at a portion of the Pickwick manuscript a couple times. The Rosenbach has many first editions signed by Dickens, the earliest surviving literary manuscript of Dickens, letters, ephemera, and a lock of Dickens's hair. More to share, and we'll have some things to share today as well. The 19th century Pickwickian playbills that are in our collections, and we'll do that at the mid-break today. So let me warn everyone watching, too, that I had a weird glitch with my computer a few minutes ago just before we went live. And if suddenly I freeze and go dead, I'll return. But I don't know, like, if that'll happen. I hope it doesn't happen. So, but in the meantime, what we'll do today is in today's episode, number 16, we will talk about chapters 44 to 46, in which everybody's visiting Fleet Street Prison, including, at the end, Mrs. Bardell. And we will get to that today. If you're watching live right now, please like and subscribe. And have fun in the live chat today. That's for you guys to have fun during it. Although it's easy to see doing this show as opposed to some of the other shows I do, I can easily see the live chat. So hopefully if you put something in there, I can respond to it as well. And Kevin, it's great to see you back here with me. We had some times over the last couple months. Bloomsday, one of them.
Great day, Ed. Great day.
Kevin,
Well attended, too. Really a good crowd out there.
very well attended. I mean, we're getting back numbers we had before the pandemic for our reading of James Joyce's novel Ulysses all day long. Kevin reads every year and did another fantastic job this year. Well, now, what was your passage again? I'm trying to remember which one
I had the part when Bloom's musing his post self-pleasuring musings about Gertie McDowell.
After the fireworks.
Right. And he throws the stick, and I strategically placed my daughter in the front row so she could catch the stick when I threw it. So I don't know if you caught that little bit of stagecraft.
I didn't actually. I missed that.
I try to bring a little ears.
As you do. Thank you so much for that. Well, we're also, before we hit the chapters, what I want to take a look at first, Kevin, is a little look at some contemporary reaction to the Pickwick Papers as it was going on. First, there was a letter that's very famous. You know, you've seen this letter before, from Miss Mary Russell Mitford on the Pickwick Papers. Mary Russell Mitford was an author. I think her most famous was Our Village, a novel in 1819. She wrote other stories. She wrote plays. She was kind of a little well known as a writer in the early 19th century. She later became, through the 19th century, she later became very critical of Dickens's style and manner. But when she discovered Pickwick, boy, did she love it. And she wrote a letter to an Irish correspondent, Miss Jeffson. And she wrote, "So you have never heard of the Pickwick Papers? Well, They publish a number once a month and print 25,000. The bookseller has made 10,000 pounds. I like all the, the numbers that go around the public here. The bookseller has made 10,000 pounds by the speculation. It is fun, London life, but without anything unpleasant. Although
are we reading the same book here?
Yeah, we've had the Fleet Street stuff. I think there's definitely some unpleasantness. But she says, lady might read it all aloud. And it is so graphic, so individual, and so true that you could curtsy to all the people as you met them in the streets. I did think there had not been a place where English is spoken to which Bose had not penetrated. Well, maybe Ireland. All the boys and girls talk his fun, the boys in the streets, and yet those who are of the highest taste like it the most. Sir Benjamin Brodie takes it to read in his carriage. Benjamin Brodie was a leading surgeon at the time. Between patient and patient. And Lord Denham studies Pickwick on the bench while the jury are deliberating. He's the Lord Chief Justice. Do take some means to borrow the Pickwick Papers. Seems like not having heard of Hogarth, whom he resembles greatly, except that he takes a far more cheerful view, a Shakespearean view of humanity. It is rather fragmentary, except the trial, number 11 or 12, which is as complete and perfect as any bit of comic writing in the English language. You must read the Pickwick Papers. So she's loving this serial as it's coming out. And it's that we hear it over and over again from people at the time, Dickens's view of humanity and the lifelike characters he creates. She's like, you can curtsy them in the street. That they're real people. And it's his Shakespearean view of humanity. Now that would take a while to parse 19th century views on Shakespeare, but it's that idea that Shakespeare takes in the breadth of human existence, I think, is how she's referring to it here. There were also reviews, Kevin. The London and Westminster Review ran a long piece on Dickens, which was like everything so far. The sketches, the Pickwick from numbers 1 to 15, which we just finished last month, and the Bentley's Miscellany magazine, numbers 1 to 4, in which Oliver Twist was being published. As in all reviews at the time, there's large chunks taking out and put in there, but the piece was written by Charles Buller. Concludes, a writer so gifted will probably not exhaust his resources for a considerable time. Well, he didn't, but he did die too soon. Imagine the twice as many Dickens novels we could have had he lived longer. But Mr. Dickens will allow us, as sincere admirers, to hope that his great powers are destined to leave some lasting monuments in our literature. This end, however, he will not attain without study, without labor, and without care. I like that he wants Dickens to like create great literature. He says to keep up such a reputation as he has acquired by the Pickwick Papers ought perhaps to content many, but should not satisfy him. The renown of Fielding and of Smollett is that to which he should aspire and labor to emulate, and if possible, to surpass. So that's it's kind of a literary historical view of Dickens's place among the great, English novelists so far. I mean, it's only 100-year tradition at this point in time. But Charles Buller is so taken that he sees this as, something that's going to continue to last, as long as he works hard at it.
Right.
They and then there's another letter. It's the final piece, which I think you're probably familiar with this one too, right, Kevin?
The letter to Foster.
Yeah. Dickens writes to his friend John Forster on July 2, 1837. So the reason I'm bringing these things up now is because this is what people are reading now and what's going on at this moment in time, just before number 16 comes out. Dickens writes, as part of the letter is, how can I thank you for your beautiful notice? Can I do so better than by saying that I feel your rich, deep appreciation of my intent and meaning more than the most glowing abstract praise that could possibly be lavished upon me. You know I have ever done so, for it was your feeling for me and mine for you that first brought us together, and I hope will keep us so till death do us part. He's marrying his friend.
Literary marriage, yeah.
Yeah. Your notices make me grateful, but very proud. So have a care of them, or you will turn my head. Now, what he's referring to is that Forster had written an anonymous review of number 15 of the Pickwick Papers, which, again, we covered last month. So, and this is what Forster wrote. In this number, the author has achieved his masterpiece. We have read it with the deepest interest and admiration. It is devoted chiefly to the delineation of the interior of Fleet Prison, of its various inmates, and of the scenes of misery and profligacy that may still, to the shame of our legislature, be witnessed daily within its walls. The exposure, we sincerely trust, will prove as beneficial as it is opportune. The truth and power with which it is made are beyond all praise, so certain, so penetrating, and so deeply aimed, and yet at the same time, so obvious and familiar are the materials employed. Every point tells, and the reality of the whole is wonderful. We place the picture by the side of those of the greatest masters of this style of fiction in our language, and it rises in the comparison. And then actually Forster then compares Dickens' scenes in the Fleet to Defoe, to Daniel Defoe's passages. And then he finishes, Forster finishes, all of it is real life and human nature. It is not a collection of humorous or pathetic dialogues about people who have no tangible existence in the mind, but it is a succession of actual scenes, the actors of which take up a place in the memory. Forster gets right away, Kevin, Dickens's kind of reformist ideas that he wants to put in his novels. And Pickwick is not generally seen as part of that endeavor these days. But it was, and it's this Fleet stuff that we saw right last month, and we'll definitely talk about more of that this month.
Well, I've always felt that the moment when Pickwick shows that mercy to Jingle and the Fleet is a moment of genuine compassion, and it it sets up the rest of the book, the light versus the darkness, and what we can do with acts of kindness to make the world a better place.
And the exposing of these things in society, that he's doing at the same time with Oliver Twist, with the workhouses.
And as we were talking, earlier, we'll get to it later in its place, but he drops a little bit of that in today that could be right out of today's newspaper. As I Googled up about about Rikers Island and the corruption and contraband in Rikers Island, he talks about Roker's facilitation of the contraband liquor with the connivance of the prisoners. So it's topical and universal. And that's what gives it that Shakespearean bit. And I mean, going back to that letter, when she mentions the Lord Chief Justice and the surgeon, those are two professions that we've seen him he's lampooning those without mercy. We get a guy today who can't afford pants for the gentleman he's got him in a fancy top, but he can't afford the pants, so he's got this Robinson Crusoe, back to Daniel Defoe again, contrivance to let the stairs down. So the doctors that we see by and large in Pickwick are members of the medical profession, or buffoons and charlatans and quacks, and yet they still read them, and like
And
I
then they
said
read 'em.
earlier, it goes back to that Orwell essay where Orwell says that Dickens managed to, lampoon all members of society without them hating him for it
Yeah.
somehow. That
Yeah.
hardest of things.
And he's so conscious of exposing the problems in his world in the hopes that they could change. And I mean it comes in most to play in something like Christmas Carol, which becomes his most well-known work. But the fact that we can see it in his first extended serial, that it's already there. And people ask me about Pickwick Papers, I mean, and I'll talk mostly about how funny it is in this world, and I love all these people and doing all that stuff, but that side of it is already there as well, and still powerful. And Forster recognizes it right off the bat, and I think it is one of the reasons why he becomes so close with Dickens.
And so many people have criticized Dickens for having characters that were caricatures or grotesques, but here's Foster saying it's real life and real
Yeah.
people. It's a mirror held up to nature, just like Hamlet said. So
Yeah.
that I think is very true. If not to range too far afield, but it's like chapter 15 in Bleak House when they go into Bell Yard. That's
Yeah.
genuine pathos.
And by that time in his career, it's like this is like the main portion of the book is describing these kinds of scenes and places and problems. In Pickwick, he's just, I mean, it's just in the midst of all these escapades that he's got this extended sequence. But he set it up for a long time. I mean, it was clear in his head that that Pickwick was going to wind up there. That was going to be the end result of what happened very early on in the novel, getting caught in the hug with Mrs. Bardell. So he knows he's going to bring these scenes into play, and of course, prison and Dickens and the personal connection he has that we've talked about in previous episodes is part of the attraction for him to shine a light on these places that he had to deal with as a child when his father and his family were imprisoned.
Yeah.
Well,
earlier we got the stories that were inserted that had a lot of darkness. Now some of the darkness is coming from the real world, And I wonder, Ed, the Oliver Twist dynamic, how much do you think, is there any bleed over creatively from one to the other? Is it making his writing darker, do you think, or changing it?
it's interesting because Oliver is definitely one of those books too that really goes back and forth between, funny and serious. So Pickwick though is mostly funny, and then occasionally, and it's really only a couple moments in the novel that it gets serious.
Right.
So with Oliver, he's able to do the whole balance more. And I don't know. I'm trying to. Robert Douglas Fairhurst has written about this extensively in his Becoming Dickens book, which is all the early years of Dickens, and he really talks about how of how what Dickens is writing about in Oliver Twist and in Pickwick and in his life that is going on at the same time. And I'm trying to think of a point that he may have made about it, but I can't. But that's something I'll pay attention to as we finish up the serial, because without knowing exactly what part he's on with Oliver, I'm certain that he made a point of that in something I was just reading, and now it's out of my head. But I'll have to look at that and come back to that in another episode. At this time in his life right now, Dickens wrote that letter from Calais. He and his wife Catherine and Fizz Hablet Brown took a little trip to Belgium, France, and then into Belgium for a week or so. I don't know if we know how long they were there. We just know that he was definitely back by July 14th because then more letters exist. But it's like weird because then there's no letters in that early part of the month. So I guess they were really enjoying themselves. He may have gone to see Waterloo, the battlefield, at that time. He may have been planning to write something about that. And that's one of the reasons why Fizz went to really see things. But I think it didn't come out to play. It didn't come to play. They wound up not producing anything from it. But then, of course, he comes back from this trip, and now he's in it. Like, I got to finish this month, and he has to quick scramble to get it finished, as seems to be happening every month for him. Writing 2 serials and editing a magazine and doing all the other little things that he's writing, and he seems to have finished number 16 at the very last possible moment to get it out on that last weekday of the month of July. And he writes there's a letter that survives. We don't have this at the Rosenbach, but we have another letter that he had to Hicks at the Rosenbach, but not this one. He writes a letter to Charles Hicks, who is the foreman printer of Bradbury and Evans. Do you have the poem there?
Yeah, let me just click here. To Mr. Hicks. Oh, Mr. Hicks, I'm heartily sick of this 16th Pickwick, which is just in the nick for the publishing trick and will read nice and slick if you'll only be quick. I don't write on tick. That's my comfort. A Vic. A Vic, Irish for my boy.
Yeah, you had to come up with a quick, like, I need one more ick rhyme at the end. But yeah, he's, and this is what he's talking about. The number we read for this month. He's like just scrambling to get it together and writes a funny little ditty to the foreman of who's overseeing all the printing that please get it out on time. I know it's my fault. Dickens is in a rush to finish up all his work. This is, it's only very late in life that this stops, right? Like in those last few novels that he's well ahead. He's like even a couple months ahead on some of those serial publications, but this whole first part of his career, no. He writes it, sends it to the printer, immediately put it in the type and printed. And this goes on for, for a long time. All righty. Well, I do want to share some of the broadsides because then, of course, there's also stage productions are happening of Pickwick already. They have been going on for months already while, when this issue comes out. And we have some broadsides of these plays at the Rosenbach, and I want to share them, and I'll do that at our mid-break today. A little reminder, last month, Mr. Pickwick, we get the whole chapter, and this is what Forster was writing about, because it's all about Pickwick in the Fleet Prison and the scenes there and the people there, like the Chancery Prisoner and all the others. And at the end, Pickwick banishes Sam, like, you can't be my servant anymore. But of course, Sam has a cunning plan and connives with his father he borrows 25 pounds from Tony Weller, his father, and then he doesn't pay it back. So Weller Sr. prosecutes him for debt, and Sam gets to go to prison. Hooray! Sam wants to be in prison with Mr. Pickwick, so he continue to be his manservant. And they even mention it between them, Kevin, Sam and his father, like, oh yeah, we got it. Like, he can't survive this. That no one believes that Mr. Pickwick can survive prison. He's just too generous, too good-hearted to be in a place like this all day, every day. He won't be able to, get through it. And he needs Sam's help. Sam knows that. He's the one that could help him get through this. Because Sam could get through anything. All righty. Chapter 44, entitled Treats of Divers Little Matters, which occurred in the fleet and of Mr. Winkle's mysterious behavior, and shows how the poor Chancery Prisoner obtained his release at last. We open with Mr. Pickwick felt a great deal too much touched by the warmth of Sam's attachment to be able to exhibit any manifestation of anger or displeasure at the precipitate course he had adopted in voluntarily consigning himself to a debtor's prison for an indefinite period. Pickwick's very touched by this, but Sam will not give him the name of his creditor. Because, of course, Kevin, what would happen if Mr. Pickwick knew who it was?
Well, he'd lean on his father, but Sam said it's because he's such a villain, a spiteful, vindictive creature with a hard heart. And that Wellerism there, you need to read the whole paragraph, like
read it.
To get the whole thing. It ain't a known use, sir, said Sam again and again. He's a malicious, bad disposed, worldly minded, spiteful, vindictive creature with a hard heart as there ain't no softening, as the virtuous clergyman remarked to the old gentleman with the dropsy when he said that upon the whole he thought he'd rather leave his property to his wife than build a chapel with it. Woo! That's a long Wellerism.
That is a long one. He's malicious. He's a bad guy. As the virtuous clergyman said about the old man who was going to die, when that old man said he's going to leave his property to his wife, not build a chapel. It takes you a while to get through that one. It's funny that Wellerisms work really well on the page, but if you heard this for the very first time out of Sam's mouth, the delayed laugh would be like such a while. You really have to put a Wellerism together out loud. They're not short at all. And this one, of course, Sam won't give the name because, of course, Pickwick would pay whoever Sam is in debt to. Pickwick is the only one in prison who could just pay all his debts and leave if he wanted to. He's the only one. And not only that, he could pay other people's debts as well, and still go free. And it's extra funny, this whole, his creditor is this malicious, bad disposed, worldly minded, spiteful, vindictive creature because it's his father he's talking about.
So this whole notion of like the theatrics, right? So Sam is playing a part now. He's an actor. His father's an actor, but the strolling player, Jingle, he's lost the ability to put on another mask.
Yeah.
Now you see through the mask and see the real man there. But Sam's continuing to develop as a character, and he goes on to say he takes his determination on principle, sir. So we're back to Pickwick and principle, which when Sam yelled it at the political rally, it was kind of just this goofy slogan, right?
Pickwick and principle. Yeah.
Right. But now we're at a much more serious place, aren't we? We're kind
of
like,
actually, the first time that Pickwick and principle was from when Pickwick was arrested because he was going to be in the duel, and he was in front of the magistrate Nupkins, and Pickwick's like, you have to listen to me, and Nupkins keeps like trying to be like the tyrant judge, like, you have to shut up, I'm doing it, and that's when Sam yells Pickwick and principle, like Pickwick.
I misremembered. I thought it was at the Eatanswill thing.
Yeah, okay. Pickwick is demanding his rights. As you're supposed to give me my rights. You can't trample me. Of course, authority can trample you. They do it all the time. But Pickwick still will assert that. And Sam's also bringing it up here, is also kind of teasing him a bit, right?
Right. Right. Hey, you're not the only one who can bite off his nose to spite his face. I can do that too.
Yeah. Like and just in that way, it's like, isn't it a little silly to be on principle when we're both here in prison? Right. And then he tells this story, which is the story of the man who killed himself on principle. And it's odd This guy does everything on principle, saves his money, clean shirt every day, never spoke to any of the relations on principle, in fear somebody would borrow money of him, has his hair cut on principle once a fortnight, blah blah blah, on and on. And then he also eats his crumpets. What is it? How much was it? 4 crumpets? Yeah, 4 crumpets every night before bed, and a crumpet for everyone, for some the Americans watching this. They're a crumpet is it's also called a muffin in England, but we use muffin in America for a different thing. It's an English muffin, like Thomas's English muffins. English muffins are exactly what crumpets are, and that's what he's talking about. It's like a griddle cake. It's more of a, bread than cake. But he eats his crumpets, and the doctor tells him, "Oh, well, that's why." And he gets sick one night, and he's like, "Oh, well, it's because you eat crumpets, and crumpets will kill you if you keep eating them." And then he says, "Well, if I eat this many crumpets, will I die?" And he says, "Yes." So he does, and then he blows his brains out. He kills himself. What did he do that for? Inquired Mr. Pickwick abruptly, for he was considerably startled. Startled by this tragical termination of the narrative. What did he do it for, sir? Reiterated Sam. Why, in support of his great principle that crumpets was wholesome, and as to show that he wouldn't be put out of his way for nobody. Odd. I mean, I didn't burst into laughter when I heard that. I was as befuddled as Mr. Pickwick was, I think. I'm not quite sure the punchline here, Kevin. Are you?
Well, and then my note says it comes from the story with from Boswell's Life of Johnson, which you corrected me. I mean, I have a Gutenberg .org version of that, but that's abbreviated too. So I don't even know if I'm reading the whole thing out of this.
Oh, but do you have
piece.
something? But
I do have something. It says
partial.
Mr. Blank. It just has a line, who loved buttered muffins but durst not eat them because they disagreed with his stomach, resolved to shoot himself, and then he ate 3 buttered muffins for breakfast before shooting himself, knowing that he should not be troubled with indigestion.
There you go. So it sounds like Dickens pulled it out of Boswell's Life of Johnson. But it's still, I'm still missing the joke a little. Well, I'm missing the joke a little bit because Sam is doing the whole thing like, so I mean, I get it, but it's a strange punchline.
I thought the best part of the story was the doctor with the Robinson Crusoe steps. I mean, again, back to that Orwell essay, the unnecessary detail being the unmistakable mark of the writing of Dickens. You got this, just a little sentence that sketches this character that I find unforgettable, like the guy with the steps,
Yeah.
And inferring that the doctor is a fraud, that he's a charlatan, he's a quack. This isn't a good doctor, and you blew your brains out anyway.
Catherine in the chat wants us to know that crumpets, I guess, are a little different than an English muffin, maybe. So maybe we'll have to investigate that some more. They all right. Well, but Sam's also he's still making this point. Like, look, what it turns out to be is, like, if you're going to be all about principle all the time, what's the point of that? It doesn't help you in the end. You've got to kind of make some leeway for navigating what life gives you as well. And Mr. Pickwick's not willing to do that. He can be admired for this too, and not unjustly paying for something that he shouldn't have to pay for, but the price that he pays might outweigh that, what he thinks is the principle of it. They and I love the way that we'll see this next month of how he gets out of it too. So um they well, Sam now has to find a place to stay there, so he moves in with he uh rents like he's in prison. He rents his rooms from a bald-headed cobbler. Um he kind of sublets from a cobbler who rented a small slip of a room in one of the upper galleries. Um and then we have this exchange between Sam and the cobbler, who's smoking in bed. Do you always smoke after you goes to bed, old cock? Inquired Weller of his landlord. And then they just kind of have this little back and forth. Um, Sam's description of the cobbler is he was a sallow man, and here's another one of these little detailed things that Dickens throws in, right? He was a sallow man, all cobblers are, and had a strong, bristly beard, all cobblers have. His face was a queer, good-tempered, crooked-featured piece of workmanship, ornamented with a couple of eyes that must have worn a very jealous expression at one time, for they sparkled yet. Man was 60 by years, and heaven knows how old by imprisonment, so that having any look approaching to mirth or contentment was singular enough. So a reminder that this cobbler's been in jail for a long time, that you have your years in life and you also have prison years,
They're
which,
like dog ears, yeah, they
yeah,
count for 7, yeah.
which clearly will take their toll on you. And the cobbler, and then Sam thinks that, what does he say that he's, oh, you been here long? 12 year, like it's no big deal. Um, Contempt, and the cobbler nods that he's in for contempt of court or not doing what the court wanted him to do. But it's a story that the cobbler tells, and the story is basically, I was ruined by having money left me. Um, oh, can't Sam's like, that can't be. And he's like, yeah, like he got an inheritance, and then he gave the inherit his job was to give the inheritance to the relatives, and he did. And then another one, you know, and then another one sued, saying I should have gotten money, and he didn't have the money now. And his lawyer, he says, my lawyers have had all my £1,000 long ago. And what between the estate, as they call it, and the costs, I'm here for 10,000 and shall stop here till I die mending shoes. So it winds up owing £10,000 instead of the original 5 because of all the court costs. And there's no way he's ever going to be able to pay it off. Um, so, but the story ends, like he tells this long story, and then he paused to see with Sam, and Sam fell asleep during the story. So we get no reaction from Sam to this whole story, but it's another instance of, I guess it's another instance of Dickens showing us the kind of ridiculous way that the courts are punishing people in his time, which will continue, and it won't be the first time we can say Bleak House during this
Oh,
episode.
yeah, I mean, there's Bleak House in there, there's Doctor's Commons out of David Copperfield, there's a lot in there. And I love what he does with the dialogue here, and it's just great writing when Sam says he left it on trust. Oh, that's a law term. Oh, there's very little trust at that shop, and then he goes on. This is you're in for contempt. Oh, why don't you tell him you're sorry for making his court contemptible? And then so there's all kinds of stuff like that where he's playing with language. You're a character, sir. Oh, I haven't got anything of that kind belonging to me. These multiple meanings of language. Just great dialogue there, I think, between the two of them.
Well, Sam's asleep. Next day, we move on. Little scenes. We get these things happening. We get scenes in here. Now, this is a picaresque, serial. Things happen. We have all these kinds of scenes, and we'll see how this plays out. But Kevin and I have talked about this. Kevin thinks it's funnier than or it's more enjoyable than I do. I think that if things fall a little flatter for me for this one, if only because I think we've had these same scenes over and over at other times, and but that's just my precursor to how I'm feeling about this. This serial part. The Pickwickians visit. And it's Tupman, Winkle, Snodgrass. They all pay a visit to Mr. Pickwick. They're all very upset that he's in prison, and they all come that way that they're very upset. But Mr. Pickwick is still happy, right? This is the triumvirate. The triumvirate were much affected. Mr. Tupman shook his head deploringly. Mr. Snodgrass drew forth his handkerchief with undisguised emotion, and Mr. Winkle retired to the window and sniffed aloud. And Sam is the one that corrects him, though. Morning, gentlemen. Away with melancholy, as the little boy said when his school missus died. Welcome to the college, gentlemen. So there's a short Wellerism that's automatically, you get the joke right away. Away with melancholy, as a little boy said when the school mistress died.
And that away with melancholy shows up with him a lot. He loved the magic flute. He loved, Don Giovanni and Mozart in general. And, it's it comes from that little part. Have you ever seen the magic flute? So there's a glockenspiel, and it's like these bells, and they chase off the bad guys with this little dance, and that's how Mozart adapted Away with Melancholy from that. And it's a short piano piece that was widely played and learned, for beginning pianists.
Well, are you saying Dickens does this too, likes it, or you mean Sam?
Dickens has it in the meta world.
Yeah.
Other novels, it shows up Away with Melancholy quite a few times.
All righty. And Sam doesn't want anybody to be upset here. I mean, and it's also he's trying to manage Mr. Pickwick, and he can't have his friends all coming in upset. That's not going to help the situation, as Sam is trying to keep Mr. Pickwick, going as he's, in prison. But it's Winkle who is upset about something, but doesn't say, like, he finds out Sam's a prisoner, and he was like, oh, I was hoping I could bring him. And then Dickens writes, there was something so very abrupt and unsettled in Mr. Winkle's manner that Mr. Pickwick involuntarily looked at his two friends for an explanation. When they don't know, he's been excited and won't tell us why. And Mr. Winkle then says it'll be necessary for him to leave town for a short time on private business, and I had hoped to prevail upon you to allow Sam to accompany me. And Sam's fingers were trembling at the gaiters as if he were rather surprised or startled. Sam looked up at Mr. Winkle, too, when he had finished speaking, and though the glance they exchanged was instantaneous, they seemed to understand each other. Something's going on. Winkle's doing something. There's something here. I don't even want to say what it is, but it's like they're making such a point of telling the readers there's something going on here, and we have to wait and find out what it is. And of course, it's it's Winkle, so it'll be, I don't know, something that'll cause problems.
Well, of course, the only thing to be done is have a big meal and drink a bottle or two of very good wine, because this is the Pickwick Papers.
And this is prison. And this is prison.
Sure.
But they only have a roast leg of mutton, an enormous meat pie, sundry dishes of vegetables, pots of porter. That's all.
No problem.
As does happen in prisons even today. Now, not as regularly as this seems to be. But this is, again, we're reminded, and we'll hit this point later on, that we can read this and say, like, oh, this is crazy. Look at like the way he can live in prison. There's a lot of things that go on in prison even today that we'd be, shocked that this kind of thing still happens. So, well, I'm not shocked. They and you think that this would be the kind of thing that, would maybe help Mr. Pickwick get through this whole ordeal, is that he can kind of eat and drink and enjoy himself here as he can outside. I mean, it's not as fun, but he could do these things, pursue his life even. But we'll see what really tips the balance for him as we go on with this chapter. Winkle is still, when he leaves, he fervently clenched Mr. Pickwick's hand with an expression of face in which deep and mighty resolve was fearfully blended with the very concentrated essence of gloom. "Good night, my dear sir," said Mr. Winkle between his set teeth. So something's going to happen here, but Dickens isn't giving us any kind of hint of what it would be. He even says what? He says, "Do not judge me harshly. Do not. When you hear that, driven to extremity by hopeless obstacles, and he doesn't finish. So I don't know what's going to happen. Are we worried? I wonder, is anybody worried? I just think because it's Winkle, I'm not worried.
Yeah.
But it's the Pickwickians, so I'm not worried. But but it is the driven to extremity by hopeless obstacles. That's like the suicide, kind of preamble there, right? But I don't think it's anything serious. As a reader, I couldn't imagine that it would. But even as we're in the serious parts of this book, well, now we get to that serious part, is that Pickwick finds out that his landlord, who is the Chancery prisoner, who he's been renting his room from, he finds out that he's having a bad night. And Mr. Roker, the jailer, tells him he won't be a Chancery prisoner very long, sir.
That's right after he brings him a softer pillow, Ed.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Because the temporary one wasn't good enough, and they have a glass of wine. It's all very genteel. They're discussing the thread count on the sheets, practically. And then they find out that he won't be a Chancery prison long.
Well, what you bring up too, that's part of the the criticism of these prison conditions too. That somebody like Mr. Pickwick can have soft pillows and drink wine and have a feast with his friends, and the Chancery prisoner just rots away. Because of, not because that he's really done something wrong, but because of this system that punishes people far greater than they deserve. So
careful, Ed, you're talking about systems. You're going to start bringing up Bleak House and Gridley again. But Pickwick says, "Great heaven, has this man been slowly murdered by the law for 6 months?"
yeah.
And Roker says, "Well, I don't know about that. I suppose he'd be took the same wherever he was." So Roker's in complete denial that he's part of anything that isn't completely on the up and up for humanity.
Yeah, Roker's like, "It's not my problem. I'm just in charge of the keys.
I just work
pillows." Yeah, so he doesn't want to deal with this at all. And well, he leads Mr. Pickwick to him, he takes Mr. Pickwick to the infirmary, and there is the Chancery prisoner. He lay stretched, the shadow of a man, wan, pale, and ghastly. The cobbler is there, referred
to as the fortunate legatee. I mean, the biting sarcasm is here, has arrived.
"Open the window," said the sick man. And then read that paragraph there. He did so.
The noise of carriages and carts, the rattle of wheels, the cries of men and boys, all the busy sounds of a mighty multitude, instinct with life and occupation, blended into one deep murmur, floated into the room. Above the hoarse, loud hum arose from time to time a boisterous laugh or a scrap of some jingling song, shouted forth by one of the giddy crowd, would strike upon the ear for an instant and then be lost amidst the roar of voices and the tramp of footsteps, the breaking of the billows of the restless sea of life that rolled heavily on without. Melancholy sounds to a quiet listener at any time. How melancholy to the watcher by the bed of death.
A breaking of the billows of the restless sea of life. This will come back in Dombey and Son.
Death of Paul. And also,
Yeah.
I was saying at the end of it evokes the end of Little Dorrit too. This notion of the noises in the street, out there and rejoining life. You know, he's leaving life. He's apart from the noises of the street. You know, so he's withdrawing from the world.
Yeah, real moving passage there. I mean, that's it's the point in this entire serial issue that's, for me, it's the high point. It's the, Dickens really paints this scene here of, the bustle outside and and what's happening in here with the quiet of the death of the Chancery prisoner, who then there's no air here. The place pollutes it. I cannot breathe it. That he's had enough of this life inside. And then he says, I hope my merciful judge will bear in mind my heavy punishment on earth. 20 years, my friend, 20 years in this hideous grave. My heart broke when my child died, and I could not even kiss him in his little coffin. My loneliness since then, in all this noise and riot, has been very dreadful. May God forgive me. He has seen my solitary lingering death. He folded his hands and, murmuring something more they could not hear, fell into a sleep. Only asleep at first, for they saw him smile. They whispered together for a little time, and the turnkey, stooping over the pillow, drew hastily back. He has got his discharge, by God, said the man. He had, but he had grown so like death in life that they knew not when he died. That's a brutal, last line of this chapter, right? They couldn't even tell he had died. He had looked so pale and deathly before he died.
I think it's noteworthy that he gave Roker the line, he has got his discharge by God, when just a page earlier, Roker was offering Nettie 2-1 odds to bet over whether the guy's going to live or die.
Yeah.
So when he says he's got his discharge by God, you're wondering, gee, is he really care about this man, or is he regretful that he didn't get the odds?
Yeah. I mean, it's just him making his little joke too. That, finally discharged. Yeah. So, well, there's the end of the Chancery prisoner. Let us move on to chapter 45, and then at some point we'll stop and we'll look at some playbills from Pickwickian Productions. But we'll start this chapter now, chapter 45, descriptive of an affecting interview between Mr. Samuel Weller and a family party. Mr. Pickwick makes a tour of the diminutive world he inhabits and resolves to mix with it in future as little as possible. So we start with Sam deciding, I think I'll go have a pint of porter and, hang around for a quarter of an hour or so. And he gets the day but one before yesterday's paper. And and a pint of porter, and he goes and he sits to drink it, and he keeps getting interrupted as he's trying to drink it, and read his paper. He interrupts himself by having to comment on things going on around him. And then he hears his name being called over and over, and shouts of Weller, and then he, gives the boy shouting and a gentle rap on the head. And then he finds his father in the prison, sitting on the bottom stair with his hat in his hand, shouting out "Weller" in his very loudest tone at half-minute intervals. We got Mr. Weller paying a visit, and he's brought with him the widow, his wife, Sam's mother-in-law, as they call her, and Stiggins, the Reverend Stiggins. Your mother-in-law and the red-nosed man, as Mr. Weller calls him, who they've already played tricks on, who's the whole point in this novel is to kind of make fun of him because he pretends to be this virtuous preacher, but he's only interested in getting free drinks and getting drunk every day. And he's not really, doesn't seem to really believe in the things that he talks about. And they're there to commiserate with Sam over his imprisonment because everybody sees it as serious. Sam knows it's just a lark. Like, I'm not really in jail. I put myself here on purpose to take care of Mr. Pickwick. I haven't done anything wrong, and he's okay with being there. Weller tells Sam that he also tells him that he gave the Stiggins a really rough ride on the way. And then they go through this thing here that before the widow and Stiggins come in, where Dickens really makes so much of Weller's laugh and his alarm, Mr. Senior Weller, his alarming features when he does so. And it's one of the more than once, Kevin, I'm sorry to say, I just don't. I find like Dickens is almost trying so hard that it's just not funny. But it's like this kind of physical humor would be perfect for the stage, but in print it kind of falls flat. Like I feel like throughout this serial part, number 16, like Dickens is, he's kind of going through the motions like that. I don't get that inspired writing that we've gotten in the rest. Even the cobbler exchange with Sam and Sam's story, the Chancery Prisoner was the one part that I thought really worked, and I don't need consequence. Like, it doesn't matter that these are just things that don't really matter for like the longer storyline. That's okay, because Dickens does that all the time, and I'm fine with it. But Dickens has been so funny inventing scenes and so heartfelt and moving with others that when he doesn't hit those high marks, especially with the funny stuff, I really notice it. And I just think that's all it is. I just think that he's not as funny as he was earlier in this book. And I'm not afraid to say that. I just think that, and it's just the number 16 within 20 parts is the only thing. And if that's my criticism, that's not a big deal at all. But it matters for me because you wait, because it's a whole month. Like, come on, be funnier. And this might fall back onto the Twist things, because what I really want to do is look and see what he's writing for Oliver Twist that month. And I wonder if there's any really funny parts in Twist for this month. And I wonder if he kind of used up his quota of passages in Twist and didn't have any left over for Pickwick. And comic writers, know this, and I've heard comic writers talk about this. It's like there's only so many jokes you'd have at any one time, and you've got to kind of replenish yourself after creating things. So I don't know. That's just a little, but we have this whole scene now. Stiggins will come on. He's ridiculous. Maybe I would think it was funnier if I had seen it rather than, having Dickens just describe a scene that we've seen already, like at least twice. in this book, and this one doesn't seem to hit any. It doesn't seem to be any funnier than the others were, or not at all. But actually, I'm sorry, I'm going on here. Actually, the audience did get to see it, not in stage shows, which had happened, but the readers get to see it because this is one of the illustrations in that Fizz. And I wonder if Dickens is also kind of relying on, hey, give me a good picture here. And let's share that, because this is Stiggins warning Sam against being evil, yes, and getting drunk. He orders rum. Oh, rum is terrible. Of course, but give me a couple of drops here. Make sure you put the sugar in and stir it just right. But
Well, the rum is the one that's less, objectionable. Unfortunately, they couldn't get it there, so you'd have to have something else.
What they get? They got port instead, right?
Where is it here? I gotta see. Yeah, port wine.
So here they are. Stiggins with his, Stiggins posing here as he's, in the midst of delivering this oratory. Tony Weller's just, give him the thumb, like, can you believe this guy? Sam's just relaxing here, taking it in. The widow's crying over here. I think there's even tears coming down her face. Because she's just upset the whole time. This is her pose that she needs to do. She needs to be upset that everything's wrong. Do we have his pipe on the table? Because he talks about that. I don't know if that's his pipe or not, but there's their drinks, and it's he's a ridiculous figure. Okay, but it wasn't that funny. I don't know. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me that there were really funny lines in this passage, Kevin.
I mean, I like some of the stuff. The all taps his vanities, that kind of stuff. And the fact that he goes on and on about hypocrisy as he's drinking, I don't know. I kind of like it. I like it. I like anything with Mr. Weller. So
I like the I do too. And I like Sam's responses in that, like that Sam's still always playing. Sam plays with what other people have said and then kind of turns it around a little bit. He says, I apprehend, young man, that your nature is no softer for this chastening, said Mr. Stiggins. And Sam says, you're very kind to say so. I hope my nature is not a soft one, sir. Very much obliged to you for your good opinion. Those kinds of things. I do usually love Mr. Weller and his, his outlook, here, but Mrs. Weller's crying, and she says, and she'll talk. She says to Sam, he's making me wretched, and Sam's like, do you hear? Lady wants nothing. The lady wants to know whether nothing will do you good. And Mr. Weller's response is, I think a pipe would benefit me a good deal. Of course, I like that line.
Incorrigible.
Yeah.
Could I be accommodated? And Sam's father is sort of morally suspect too. He's taking the high ground. But that story about him tipping getting paid off in the political and tipping the guy over, was that true or not? We're kind of wondering, was that really something that happened or not? He talks here about knocking Stiggins over as he drives him home, into if he falls out and tipped over into a hedge with the shepherd in it, on the way home. You wonder if he'd do that too. So, and then I kind of wonder why he married the widow. Did he marry the widow because she had, good liquor too, or not?
He got tricked into it, didn't he? I'm trying to remember the story, but he kind of, didn't want to, but he kind of did. And
it doesn't sound like a love match,
No.
And then, of Of course, but he goes on again, like he talked about the alibi. Now he's got another scheme to get him out, the empty piano. I think that's kind of a funny bit. And then he starts talking about going to the Americans as well. A little foreshadowing there, maybe of things to come.
That's he says, when then Stiggins and the mother-in-law are leaving, and he says that he's got a plan. Me and a cabinet maker has devised a plan for getting him out, meaning Mr. Pickwick. A pianer, Samival, a pianer. And they're gonna bring in a hollow piano and put Mr. Pickwick inside it, and then take him out in it.
And send him to America. And
they're going to send him to America, where the Americans will pay his expenses and more if he blows him off enough. Which, in a sense, the opposite happens with Dickens, right? Dickens goes to America, doesn't blow. I mean, by blowing up, mean praising them, like blowing up their egos. When Dickens goes to America, then he writes a book and he criticizes. Everybody gets angry with him. But this is the way to do it when you're an author. Just go to America, tell them they're great, and guess what? They'll love you and they'll give you money.
Hey, it worked for Frances Trollope, Anthony Trollope's mother. She wrote the book Domestic Manners of the Americans in 1832. So it was something that folks were doing.
Well, so he's got a plan. First, he needs the alibi. That's what Mr. Weller thinks. Now he's like, now I got to break him out of prison, and we know this is ridiculousness. That won't happen, but it's fun that Mr. Weller is, this is his goal. So he needs something to plan as well. All righty. Now's when I'm going to take a little mid break. First, I'm going to remind all of you I'm going to take this moment to thank all of you for watching this episode. As a nonprofit organization, the Rosenbach Museum and Library depends on the generosity of friends and supporters like you to keep programs like this free and accessible to hundreds of fellow Dickens lovers worldwide. If you would like to donate to the Rosenbach, you can do so at our website, and I will put the link in our chat. If you would like to become a member, membership gives you free museum admission, discounts on programs and courses, exclusive invitation to member-only events, and early access to register for programs and courses as well. You can learn more about how to become a member on our website. Rosenbach membership also makes a great gift. But instead of doing my normal corresponding members of Pickwick Monthly, this episode, we're going to take a little time to look at some of the items in our collections at the Rosenbach. And they are, if I can find my right documents here. Yes, they are playbills that we have from later in, actually after Pickwick had finished being published with playbills we have, but plays were, and one of these was being performed while it was still going on. And by the end of 1838, there were at least 26 adaptations of Pickwick on the stage. And there were 3 stage adaptations that appeared while the serial was still running. The first of these was called, and it was, Kevin, I had to go down such a long rabbit hole. I'm like, oh, I've got these things and I've got info about them and I'll share that with everybody. All the dates of what was going on when were like different in every single work that I had looked at. And it took a while to unravel it all. And what happened was Percy Fitzgerald, with the great Pickwickian who wrote so much about Dickens and Pickwick, got his dates wrong, and then all those dates were then later adopted by other people. You got your new hat on. But here's what I've found. The first Dickens Pickwick, the first Pickwick play, actually debuted on Monday, March 27th, 1837. Was written only after the first 8 parts had been published in the at the City of London Theatre in Norton Folgate. And it was called The Pickwick Club, or The Age We Live In, by Edward Sterling. And it was a burletta extravaganza in 3 acts, which is basically an excuse to have a lot of funny songs and then just some funny scenes, and that's all it is. Now, Dickens is also writing these kind of burlesques and burlettas himself for the stage. But this one, they took the characters. And what's interesting is that this one's tough to find. You can find copies of this. Sterling, the author, and actually the others who followed, what I find interesting is they relied just as much on Fizz's illustrations as they did on the text of the book in order to create the costumes, the look of the characters, and to create the scenes of the play. And this is sometimes evident in stage directions and things like that. You see that, like, oh, he's kind of almost not quite a tableau, but definitely trying to create things that are in illustrations. So that was the first one. The first one was The Pickwick Club, or The Age We Live In, that came out in March 1837. The second was called The Peregrinations of Pickwick by William Layman Reed. And we don't have a playbill of that, but within the book called Pictorial Pickwickiana, he's got the description of film, and this is kind of the first description or playbill from The Peregrinations of Pickwick. And actually it changed, because what he had to seriously change at some point. What he writes here: the papers upon which this drama is principally founded have obtained a celebrity wholly unexampled in that class of literature. The proprietors of the Adelphi were anxious to present it in the most favorable dramatic form to the public, a serious story. The incidents from an episode in the Pickwick Papers has therefore been interwoven with the preambulations of the Pickwickians. And then he has a great portion of the comic dialogue is extracted from the Pickwick Papers by the express permission of the author, C. Dickens, Esquire, better known as Bose. Dickens didn't agree to that at all.
all lies?
Yeah, that's pretty much all lies. And what happened is that the serious story was kind of taken out before it was ever really performed. And they wound up just going with this very short farcical piece. You can actually find a PDF of this online. I think I got them Google Books. A very terrible Xeroxed copy of it. That like a scan of a Xerox copy. It's just a few scenes in the book. Now you see here, you have Act 1, the miser father, old Clutchley, Maria, Nora, attendant to Miss Wardle, and then the club. So it seemed like they were going to have this scene where this miser father, and it exists in what survived, in that he loans money to Snodgrass, I think it is. And then that's going to come back to haunt him. But then it's just completely dropped, and that never happens. Instead, what we get are scenes, and he's got all the characters in here. And here there's an elopement, and the ball, and the scene in the White Hart, the Marshalsea prison. None of this stuff happens. Well, the White Hart does, because Jingle does run off with Aunt Rachel Wardle, and they go get him, and then they get Sam, and it all ends rather abruptly. What it gives them a chance to do is, you'll see this, Mrs. Fitzwilliam sings an Irish medley. It's really, and up here, and again in the elopement, she sings "O Killarney's Lucid Lake," an old Irish melody. apparently they had this really pretty actress who did great Irish songs. So she got to sing her Irish songs.
And she
Amid,
sang another one, see, in the Marshalsea prison. The
yes,
grave where the dear one
that one
died.
winds up being cut out. That whole scene's cut out.
Oh,
At
okay.
least that we know of, because then what was published later, um, the author said, well, we wanted all this stuff in there, but then something happened and we couldn't do it. So we cut it all out and then we just had the funny stuff. And that's what he did wind up printing. So, and then it just ends with Mr. Pickwick saying, oh, everybody's happy. Good. We're all happy. And then they have a dance and another song. Um, it's, that's all it is. Very, very light, but he does actually take the words from the book. Like, he'll have Jingle speaking, but also Jingle also uses some of the text, like the woman getting her head knocked off in the coach and things like that. So that stuff's all there. He does use the words of Dickens. Well,
Mhm.
on July 10th, right around when just before this number 16 that we're doing tonight comes out, another play is debuts, and it's called Sam Weller or the Pickwickians, and it's put on at the Strand Theater, and it's written by W.T. Moncrief, William Moncrief. And this is one of the ones that we have a playbill for at the Rosenbach. And here it is. The New Strand Theater. Now, this is a little later, this one, the playbill itself. This was performed in July 37, as we're reading now, but you see this one is from a later production, Tuesday, May 29, 1838, and during the week. Well, also before that, every night you could go see Hamlet, the travesty, every night. A comic version of Hamlet that they were performing there as well. But Sam Weller or the Pickwickians, I love the printing on this kind of wood stuff, kind of mimicking the odd things that Dickens would have in his serial covers as well. And it's just everybody from the book doing their scenes. Mr. Pickwick is a single gentleman of fortune, founder of the Pickwick Club, seeking adventures in pursuit of knowledge. And all the Alfred Jingle Esquire is a walking gentleman living on his wits. And here's Sam, and we get Sam Weller's Youthful Days, a popular new song of similes. So I guess they're kind of Wellerism songs or something. I don't know. And then the rest of the cast. But this is first produced when, a little more than, 15 parts have been published when, this hits the stage. So it's probably written a little before then. So they can do whatever the heck they want to do. Now, Dickens is really annoyed at this too. He writes to Forster in a letter a couple months later. He alludes to these things, and he says, and it's likely he's talking about Moncrief's Sam Weller play. And Dickens writes, well, if the Pickwick has been the means of putting a few shillings in the vermin-eaten pockets of so miserable a creature, and has saved him from a workhouse or a jail, let him empty out his little pot of filth and welcome. I am quite content to have been the means of relieving him. Dickens is not happy with this production. And it's funny because after this now, Moncrief writing Sam Weller, the Pickwickians, he'll do another one too. He'll do a sequel to it later called Sam Weller's Tour or the Pickwickians in France, which I think, do I have that one too? Yep, here it is. This will come out after Pickwick is over. Sam Weller's Tour, the Pickwickians in France, by the author of Sam Weller. It's not on yet. They're letting people know that it will be. In this is in active preparation and will be produced as soon as an extensive variety of music, scenery, dresses, decorations, national dances, etc., will possibly permit. The whole company of the theater will appear in the drama, and all the artists of the establishment with numerous assistants are engaged. So you don't want to miss this production. Dickens will then satirize Moncrief in Nicholas Nickleby. In chapter 48 of Nickleby, when the Krumels and their theatrical troupe, Moncrief is thought to be, and he likely is, who Dickens is describing as the literary gentleman at the Krumels' farewell supper, who had dramatized in his time 247 novels as fast as they had come out, some of them faster than they had come out. And that's precisely what's going on with Dickens's plays here, is that things are being produced while they're still on this, while he's still writing them, and they invent all kinds of different endings and do different things with them. But for Pickwick, it's basically the characters having fun on stage as we get in the novel. It kind of doesn't, change that much. Later, too, Moncrief then just put together a show called Scraps from Pickwick. I'm sorry, this isn't Moncrief. This was W.H. Murray. And this was in Edinburgh at the Theatre Royal in Edinburgh. Scraps from Pickwick. And we get the scene breakdowns here. Scrap 1 is at the White Hart Inn. Jingle, Sam's hired. They throw it all in the one thing. The Travelers room at Rochester. The Review near Rochester with the soldiers getting caught. The garden at Manor Farm. The barn fitted up for Harvest Home. We get a rustic ballet and Passeul by Madame Leclerc. Instead of like the Christmas scene, this is what we get there. Street in London, interview with Jingle and his old chum Dismal Jemmy, plan for carrying on the war. I guess his battle with Pickwick. Speculation in timber. The hustings. So this is the Eton Swill, part here. More Eton Swill in the Travelers room at Rochester, electioneering anecdotes. Then the boarding school where Pickwick is tricked into going there and gets captured. And then Scrap 10 Justice Room, Magna Carta forever, Pickwick's acquittal and return to London. So just scenes from the book, which are, relatively the scenes from the book, or just mixed up and put here and there. And Pickwick is pulling them in. More people may wind up seeing Pickwick on stage in these kinds of shows than actually see him, than actually read him at this stage. I think it holds true. I think it's like today in movies. More people will see the movie based on a book than will have read it. It's a theater-loving crowd. And there's one really odd one at the end. I wish we had a playbill for this. We don't. And it's basically Pickwick on horseback. And this happens a few years later. This is in 1842. There's a theater called Astley's Amphitheater, in which they do equestrian shows. And here's a picture of it. At the time, you're all up here, and they have horses doing all kinds of horse tricks. And there was actually a show, an equestrian show, in which characters from the Pickwick Papers would gallop around on horses. And they could do this easily because it's so famous and the illustrations are so famous. So everybody knows what Pickwick looks like. Everybody knows what Sam looks like, So, and one of the scenes I had described was Tony Weller comes out on a horse and he's trying to escape the widder. you know, the old widow who he's married, and she's galloping, and I'm sure they do some tricks while there. But part of the trick is that Tony Weller does a costume change on the horse, and he turns into the fat boy, and then that leads her to like leave him alone. Mr. Pickwick comes out and he does a transformation and he becomes Sam Weller on horseback. And I wish I had seen it. I can't imagine how odd and enjoyable this would have been to see Pickwickian characters on horseback in the middle of a theater. So Astley's Amphitheater, Pickwick on horseback, actually happened. All righty. So that's fun, and it's great that we have these playbills at the Rosenbach as part of our Dickens collection. We have some other playbills too that relate to other things that he'd done. There's a Frozen Deep playbill that we have as a little play he wrote with Wilkie Collins about the Franklin expedition to the Arctic and how they were lost, and Dickens and Collins create this very melodramatic show, which Dickens himself stars in, and met Ellen Ternan at the time. And we have a playbill for that. We have another
Frozen Deep.
Yeah, Frozen Deep. That's it. Thank you. And another show we have that he did. So, but these shows are going on all the time. Dickens gets absolutely no money for them. Copyright laws do not prevent, or it's legal to take characters from a play, or take characters from a book and make a play about it. This is an entirely different work now. I can steal anything I want, and as long as I put it in a different form. This will all change by the end of the century, in which then you can reserve your copyright for your books by doing something, actually having it read on the stage, and then you reserve the copyrights for them. But at the time, it just happens, and Dickens gets furious. Is it Christmas Carol that he decides to start suing them, or was it Nickleby? When he finally, I think it's Christmas Carol. It's Christmas Carol. And he finally says, with Christmas Carol, it's the other pirate editions that are coming out, because people are also rewriting. While these shows are going on, while Pickwick is being written and published every month, there's also a penny Pickwick that you can get, which is just, some very several pages of kind of the same story, with the names are all spelled a little bit differently, and it's not that funny, but it only cost a penny. It's not a whole shilling for a part. And Dickens gets increasingly infuriated with these pirate productions of his works, that he finally sues and wins. And of course, the legal things happen. The person he sues claims bankruptcy, and then Dickens has to pay all the court costs and actually loses money by winning his case. It's all craziness, but the Dickens went and saw some shows later in life and kind of liked some of them, and did give approval for some shows later in his career. But the shows are something that he can do nothing about. They're just going to happen. So the public wants them.
Yeah, the mania was in full fury. I guess anything that smelled or smacked of Dickens, there was an insatiable demand. So he just wrote it.
They needed more Pickwick.
I saw your mug there, Ed. Did you know there's only one dragon in Bywater and it's green?
And it's green, the green dragon. Yeah. My daughters got this for me in New Zealand when they visited the Tulp.
Nice. Oh, it's got authentic provenance too.
So yeah. So I thought that was a good mug to have today. So all righty. Well, we're not doing the Tolkien today. We're going to continue to talk about Dickens and Pickwick Papers. I talk about Tolkien with other groups that I do. I'm having a shandy gaff too, beer and ginger ale. Very good. Well, the widow and Stiggins and Mr. Weller leave, and Pickwick says to Sam, I'm going to take a walk around the prison, and I wish you to attend me. I see a prisoner we know coming this way, Sam. And sure enough, Jingle walks up. He looked less miserable than before. And he's Mr. Pickwick has helped him. He's got his, better clothes. He's got his hair cut. He took off his hat as Mr. Pickwick saluted him and seemed much humbled and abashed at the sight of Sam Weller. And then Job Trotter is there too. Sam is shocked to see them. He didn't know they were in the prison yet. That all happened with Mr. Pickwick helping when Sam had left, before he himself got himself back to prison. And then Mr. Pickwick says, can you walk? Well, you can follow. I want to speak with you, Mr. Jingle. Can you walk without his arm? Oh, I guess meaning Trotter. And then, certainly, sir, already, not too fast, legs shaky, head queer, round and around, earthquakey sort of feeling. Very. Here, give me your arm, said Mr. Pickwick. No, no, replied Jingle. Won't indeed, rather not. Nonsense, said Mr. Pickwick. Lean upon me, I desire, sir. And it's, Pickwick insisting on taking his arm, like two things are going on here, Kevin, right? Like, one, he's helping him because he really can't walk on his own. He's still too weak from being malnourished for so long. But it's also showing everyone else in the prison that Pickwick is showing them that he's not ashamed of Jingle's company, as, not just that I'm not angry with this person who's done me wrong, but like I'm quite okay taking this, poor man's arm who's clearly in here because, he did, things that deserved him to be put in here. And that's a nice little touch. I mean, this is a very public place, and Mr. Pickwick is not ashamed of that. Sam is shocked, not at that, but just that they're there. He can't believe that they've run into them again. And Sam's first act is to, when he sees Job Trotter and how he doesn't look very, good, is to get him a drink. Get him a pint of porter that he would have to drink in one shot. Should I do it? No, I won't. But we had a Wellerism first. Job says, things has altered with me, sir. And Sam says, I should think they had, serving his companion's rags with undisguised wonder. This is rather a change for the worse, Mr. Trotter, as the gentleman said when he got 2 doubtful shillings and 6 pennorth of pocket pieces for a good half-crown. Then Sam wants to, you look like you need some nourishment. And of course, we know that porter beer is nourishing. It really is. So he takes him for a pot of porter, and he makes him drink it and turn the mug upside down to prove that he drank it. And then he says he wants to, and then he says, you need some food. And he says, oh, that's okay, because we have half a leg of mutton and potatoes from the governor, Mr. Pickwick. And this is when Sam says, what, has he been providing for you? And he has. And I like this, Kevin, because before, I mean, he sees Pickwick taking Mr. Jingle's arm, but before he knows that Pickwick is supporting them, Sam has already offered to support Trotter. He's already given him a pot of porter. He already wants to give him food. Sam comes to the same conclusion, but perhaps, Kevin, it's because he sees Mr. Pickwick giving doing this to Jingle? I like what you were telling me earlier about this.
I think, Pickwick showed him the way, I think Sam's learning from Pickwick now. Pickwick, is a little more compassionate, and he's letting some of that mercy drop from heaven. And I think Sam comes from a background where to show mercy might have been to feel like you were being weak, showing weakness. So I think that the Sam who's been taking care of Mr. Pickwick, now he's learning, the quality of mercy's not strange from Pickwick.
Mm-hmm. And then Sam's description of him is, well, then Job's like, oh, I'd serve Mr. Pickwick in a heartbeat. And Sam's like, no, you won't. I'll trouble you, my friend. None of that. No one serves him but me. But then he has the lines here. Read that. I never heard, mind you.
I never heard, mind you, nor read of in storybooks, nor seen in pictures, any angel in tights and gaiters, not even in spectacles, as I remember, though that may have been done for anything I know to the contrary. But mark my words, Job Trotter, he's a regular thoroughbred angel for all that. And let me see the man as ventures to tell me he knows a better one.
Mm-hmm. Angel in tights and gaiters. That's that's the Mr. Pickwick here. And it's what Mr. Pickwick has become in this novel. We went from this, naive, befuddled, kind of foolish character who didn't
Taking notes and
who didn't know what
trying to figure out the world, which of course gets to the core, conundrum and the unsolvable mystery of how Mr. Pickwick has any money at all if he's such a babe in the woods.
Mm-hmm.
But we just have to, let our suspension of disbelief carry us there. Somehow he's a businessman without a hard side to him. Somehow.
He's developed into this point over the course of this book now, where now he is the kind of icon of benevolence, from being the icon of this like foolish, sportsman, to the icon of benevolence, and that his naivete is now a kind of badge of honor, that it says that he's good and innocent. His innocent means he's good. And he recognizes that I should help people and never be cynical about, these kinds of situations. So, and it's, I mean, who he represents at the end of the book. And this is the moment where it's really, and Dickens writes it, that he's the angel in tights and gaiters. That's the character this is what he's become now over the course of writing all these episodes. Pickwick tells Sam overhears him tell Jingle, your health, we will see how your health becomes and think about it. Meanwhile, make the statement out for me when you feel yourself equal to the task, and I would discuss the subject with you when I have considered it. So Jingle's apparently writing some statement out for Pickwick, but we don't know what that is about yet. So, but I wanted to point it out because it's there. Well, Pickwick goes around now and then walks around the prison looking at all the people, everyone sitting and sauntering or sitting about in every possible attitude of listless idleness. People waiting for their day in court. Some were shabby, some were smart, many dirty, a few clean, all lounging around like beasts in a menagerie. And then he sees dirty, slipshod women passed and repassed on their way to the cooking house in the corner of the yard. The children screamed and fought with each other. And then there was he says, save in a little miserable shed a few yards off, where lay, all quiet and ghastly, the body of the Chancery prisoner who had died the night before, awaiting the mockery of an inquest. The body. It is the lawyer's term for the restless, whirling mass of cares and anxieties, affections, hopes, and griefs that make up the living man. The law had his body, and there it lay, clothed in grave clothes, an awful witness to its tender mercy. The whole, have a corpse, the habeas corpus joke that Sam kept making is now here turned into this kind of accusation of habeas corpus that Dickens sees in this system. Well, they have one more thing to see, and that's a whistling shop, which is apparently a secret gin shop that the turnkeys, the guards, get money for ignoring exists. They can have porter. Beer is allowed in the prison, but hard liquor is not. By rule, it's not, but of course it is. There's a gin shop there, and Mr. Pickwick is taken to it, where they have a nice little shot of gin, and Roker doesn't, care. They see Roker, and he winks to the guy running the gin shop, so he gets his money for letting it be in there. And this is all still going on too, right? This is what you were talking to me about earlier.
Oh yeah, we were talking about the article, like in one easy Google search, you just put in Rikers Island and contraband, and you see a story just from April of this year about the guards getting arrested for bringing contraband into the prison. Contraband, cigarettes, liquor, drugs, you name it. So, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Ed, his lifelong concern with prison reform, his visit to Eastern State and Philly, that's something that's going to preoccupy him from so many different angles throughout his writings.
Yeah. Pickwick seeing all this stuff, wandering around, the squalor, the turmoil, the noise, every corner, and he finally says, "I have seen enough," said Mr. Pickwick as he threw himself into a chair in his little apartment. "My head aches with these scenes, and my heart too. Henceforth, I will be a prisoner in my own room."
The line before that, can I read it? The whole place seemed restless and troubled, and the people were crowding and flitting to and fro, like the shadows in an uneasy dream. Light and shadows, a big theme here.
Mhm.
It's almost that scene of Odysseus with the blood when he goes to the underworld and the shadows are flitting to and fro. It's almost like something out of Homer.
Yeah. That's a great reference there. The Mr. Pickwick is done with this life. Like he can't he can't witness it anymore, I guess. Is that what he's doing here? That he's just I have to just go be by myself now? It's too
Yeah,
effective.
it's too much Mivens and Spangle and over again. He's just got to withdraw and try to regroup. He can, and I think throughout Dickens' writings, you talk about the systemic change versus people just acting better. Again, that Orwell wrote about. That's here. It's he can do some things, Ed, like he can help Jingle, he can help Trotter, but the good deeds can only do so much, so he's got to preserve himself and sort of seal
And
himself
and
off.
this was the fear from Sam and all his friends and everybody that this was going to happen to him, and his health was beginning to suffer from the closeness of the confinement. And they're trying to get him. They keep trying to, like, you have to leave, and he won't do it. Well,
He won't do it for himself, Ed, but for others,
oh, we'll find out.
perhaps.
Not in this chapter. We'll find out.
Not in this chapter.
But now we're in 46. Records a touching act of delicate feeling, not unmixed with pleasantry, achieved and performed by Messrs. Dodson and Fogg. So, they're going to do something really nice. Well, in their eyes, maybe. This is again, we're three people in a hackney cab, and they can't decide which door to stop at. And it's like a page and a half in the serial, and it's just
I'm with you here. This
it's
runs a little
funny, and it's
tedious
a little
there.
confusing at first. Like, who are these people? And then we find out it's
They were the landlords of the
yeah,
medical students over in Lant Street.
yeah,
Those rattles, and it
Mrs.
was funny
Rattle.
then. They were
Mrs.
funny.
Rattle, the angry landlady
Right.
of Bob Sawyer, very funny scenes with her being angry and them ignoring her. And now this it's like a bickering couple kind of thing. And they're going to Mrs. Bardell because they're all going they're all going to go to the Spaniards Inn in Hampstead for
To the tea gardens. It's a
tea
pleasure
garden.
outing. They're
Yeah,
going to go up to the country at this point.
it is. I mean,
You
the
didn't take the
Hampstead.
northern line to Hampstead like I did. I mean, Hampstead's a charming village now, but it's part of London. But
It is
then
part of
you went
London
up
now.
there. You went up there, and it was kind of like going to the
Then it
country. You
was
could go to
going out in the
Hampstead
sticks.
Heath.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a little bit of sunlight and fresh
He
air.
he's still preserved today. They still have that there. You can go.
Oh yeah, I've been up there. Yeah.
The I have the Hampstead or the Spaniard Inn. Here's a picture of it. I found this print online. This dates from about 1840. So it's an old, quaint. It seems like you're in a village. People would come up. This is it here in the background, and then in the back they have this kind of garden area where people would have tea outside. Now here's a later drawing from 1928 of the tea garden that they have, but this pretty much existed when in the 19th century as well, and you would sit outside in the garden and have your tea. They and that's what they're going to do. It's still around. The Spaniard is still there. You can did you visit it or
Only the exterior,
Only
only
the
the
exterior?
outside. Yeah.
I'll put a link to their website in the live chat. They claim that Dick Turpin, the famous highwayman, was born there in that building. And Sam sang a song about Dick Turpin in number 15, the last number. The building was built in 1585. They also claim that Keats wrote Ode to a Nightingale in their gardens, but that's probably not true. And although he may have frequented it. And there's a mention of the Spaniard in Dracula because they just mentioned that Van Helsing and Seward walked by the Spaniard in Hampstead because that's where Lucy is buried. That's where the area of Hampstead is being haunted by the Bloofer lady. So the Spaniard gets a shout out in Dracula.
At Highgate Cemetery.
Well, before they go, we've got this banter back and forth. It's just flat. It doesn't they're just but they get to the Spaniard and they I mean this is pages of them talking to each other before we get there, and I didn't somebody correct me. Somebody put a funny line in the chat because I didn't really find one. It's really a case of, hey Dickens, guess what you did? You set the bar so high that when you don't get there, now I'm like, come on, be funnier. But they all get to the Spaniards Tea Gardens, and it is they even say how sweet the country is, to be sure. They're out in the country now. They're out of London. And a hackney coach shows up while they're there, and sure enough, it's Mr. Jackson from Dodson and Fogg, the lawyers who represented Mrs. Bardell in the court case. And they think, what, Mr. Pickwick, maybe he paid the damages or offered marriage, said Mrs. Cluppins. Jackson tells her that they pressing business, and Dodson and Fogg sent the carriage to bring you to them. the coach to bring you to them, and they're like there's a certain degree of pride and importance about being wanted by one's lawyers in such a monstrous hurry, felt by no one ever. No one has ever felt that your lawyers had to see you, that was, you'd be proud and important. No, you don't want your lawyers to have to see you in a hurry. No one should want that. And she talks to Jackson here, and she says they're still in the carriage here, yeah. And he says, sad thing about these costs of our people, ain't it? Said Jackson when Mrs. Cluppins and Mrs. Sanders had fallen asleep. The whole party goes. Your bill of costs, I mean. I'm very sorry they can't get them. Dodson and Fogg can't get the cost paid. But if you law gentlemen do these things on speculation, why, you must get a loss now and then, you know. And then he says, you gave them a cognivant for the amount of your costs after the trial, I'm told. And she says, yes, just a matter of form. Certainly, said Jackson dryly, quite a matter of form, quite. Now, the cognivant is
I got a note here. You want me to read it?
Sure.
A legal document acknowledging the costs, which enables Dodson and Fogg to proceed summarily without having to sue Mrs. Bardell. So she signed a document that basically says, yeah, I owe them the money.
Yep. That
as a matter of fact, she can't contest that before a judge. So they can move for a summary judgment. They just get a judgment against her and bang. The rest of it happens.
No trial.
Very quickly.
No
trial. Right. The facts are not disputed.
They don't have to sue her to get the money. She's just liable for it automatically because, she signed this cognivant. Well, she's wondering, and they go to a place, and there's a porch with a number of men, and she's like, what is this? And he says, oh, it's one of our public offices. And they take her in, and she's like, oh, what's going on? And Jackson assures her that there never was a more delicate man than Dodson man, or a more humane man than Fogg. It was their duty in the way of business to take you in execution for them costs, but they were anxious to spare your feelings as much as they could. What a comfort it must be to you to think how it's been done. This is the fleet, man. Wish you good night, Mrs. Bardell. Good night, Tommy. She's in prison. They were so nice that they gently took her to prison. That was so nice of them. Well, she screams, and Tommy roars, and Mrs. Cluppins shrunk within herself. Mrs. Sanders made off without more ado. And there stood the injured Mr. Pickwick, taking his nightly allowance of air, and beside him leant Samuel Weller, who, seeing Mrs. Bardell, took his hat off with mock reverence, while his master turned indignantly on his heel. And we do have that illustration from Fizz of her arrival at the prison here, and let us look at that. Here they are, all the rough, the guard, the turnkey here, and the kind of rough prisoners at the top of the steps. And there she is, shocked at seeing. Look at a little was it Tommy? He's like horrified, like, it's Mr. Pickwick. One lady running off.
Yeah, Mrs. Sanders made off without more ado.
She's like,
she was out of there, man. She was afraid she'd get shut in without dinner. Look at her. She's going, man.
Yeah, she's not. And Mr. Pickwick is just angry. That's all that's in his face there. He is just, any parts of this.
But you gotta believe Dodson and Fogg sucked her in. Ed, because she signed that document after the trial. You got to believe that they told her it was going to be purely on speculation. Yep. And as I'm sure we all remember that, at the trial, Sam says, Oh, it was, I overheard that it was so kind that Mrs. Bardell said that Dodson and Fogg would take the trial on speculation. Now, it's my understanding at that time that taking a trial, that proceeding in that manner on speculation, it's not like now you can't drive down the highway without seeing the billboard, advertising, lawyers that'll take that case on those terms, But in those days, it was frowned upon. It
It
was looked
was.
on as a lousy, piece of business.
And what had happened was, especially in these breach of marriage cases, lawyers were doing this specifically. They were going out and seeking cases and telling the people that basically, like you see in the billboards today, if you don't win the case, you won't pay anything. And they were okay with
Right.
making those cases because they knew that they were getting so many favorable outcomes that sometimes when they did lose, it was fine. It was not going to outweigh,
Just the cost of doing business.
it was not going to outweigh how much money they were making. But in this case, Dodson and Fogg are so crooked that they get her to sign a document, which means she'll have to pay regardless. So, well, Mr. Pickwick walks away from her, and and Sam finds out that it's Dodson and Fogg, execution on cognovit for costs. And Sam says, "Here, Job, run to Mr. Perkers, Job. I want him directly. I see some good in this. Here's a game. Hooray. Where's the governor?" That reminded me, too, that like Sam is there on purpose. Like he's in prison, but Job's not. Job's still just there as a visitor. Like he's decided I may as well continue to serve Jingle in prison rather than try to do anything. That's the position in life Job is at. He has so little prospects that he has to continue to serve somebody in prison and starve to death serving him, before Mr. Pickwick meets them.
Well, that's one way of looking at it, but they do say that he's also loyal to his master. So, the more generous reading is he's trying to stick with the guy who got him there, even if there is prison.
Yeah. That's the Mr. Pickwick benevolent reading.
Right. Now, I love when Sam says, "Who's the plaintiffs?" So he's playing. It's not the plaintiff; it's the plaintiff.
Plaintiffs.
Yeah,
I missed that. Thank you.
It's always with the language with him. He's a master of language.
For these sad people, yeah. They And so he sends Job off, and then he says, but there was no reply to these inquiries, for Job had started furiously off the instant he received his commission, and Mrs. Bardell had fainted in real downright earnest. So Sam's got an idea right off the bat here, and we will have to wait till next month to find out what that plan is.
I like the illustration. It plays to his strengths, I think, with multiple figures there. But yeah, that brings us to the end of 16. And it's definitely a setup.
We get a lot of setup for this.
We're setting up the next.
We do. And it wasn't as funny as these chapters usually are. It had some nice moments. The best moment I thought was the Chancery Prisoner and what he wrote about that, and the reaction, and then Mr. Pickwick's reaction to the scenes going on around him. But I expect more funny especially when Mr. Weller's in there. So, all righty. Well, thank you, Pickwickians, for joining us for number 16 of Pickwick Monthly. Kevin, thank you, my friend. We won't see you again until our final episode. There's only 3 more episodes of Pickwick Monthly left. 3.
So Ed, this is, I've been coming in and out, and the rest of the hosts, you've been in it every month. What are your feelings about it at this point? This monthly thing, as opposed to you have so many other things going on, Sherlock Weekly. I mean, this is a different vibe, isn't it? This monthly.
It is. We'll really talk about this in the final episode because right now, what I feel like this is what I wanted. I've been living in, as everybody who's tuned in all these episodes too, I've been living with the Pickwick Papers for 17 months right now. So we have 3 to go. And it is, I will really miss living in this world like this every month. Because I have to do I do the research and I read stuff and I'm reading all around. So I'm really, every month I get a big chunk of this in my life. And it's, I still love it. I still love it. And I've, even with this month's chapter, with this month's serial part where I didn't think it was as exciting, I never get tired of it. So not yet. Maybe I will.
Awesome.
Maybe by month 19, I'll be like, heck with this, I'm done.
I'll give you the coachman salute.
All righty. Well, coming up next month, everybody, we have a special guest co-host, Max McGee, who is in our chat today, who's watching. Max is wonderful. He's been watching the show from the beginning, and he was a co-host on the Sherlock Mondays Hound of the Baskervilles series that we did not too long ago. Max is a delight, and I am really looking forward to talking with him about number 17, chapters 47 to 49. It is a jam-packed serial part next month. We get the resolution of our whole fleet prison story. Winkle returns to reveal his secret. Bob Sawyer returns to do a little more drinking. And we get the final interpolated tale of the book. So I'm going to tell you the story of the bagman's uncle, which is actually a very famous story for Dickens. So much next month. Again, let me remind you all to subscribe to our YouTube channel, to like these videos. You can support the Rosenbach through donation. Your support helps us create more programs like this and also care for our collections. You could also become a member. Membership gives you early access, discounts to programs and courses. You can find out more at our website. I'm Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library. I'll see you all next month for number 17 of the Pickwick Papers. Kevin, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Until then, everyone, I will follow Tony Weller's advice. I think a pipe would benefit me a good deal. Good night, everybody. Good day. Good month. See you all in a month. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Cheerio. Cheers.
All right.